Hi everyone. So today I'm going to talk about the Green Revolution, famine, and the types of agriculture. So I've merged a couple of different topics into one PowerPoint here, and I'm trying to make this one quick, so I'm going to try to limit myself to 20-25 minutes here. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is this thing called the population bomb. So the population bomb was a book that was written by this guy named Dr. Paul Ehrlich. He's German, and it was about how human population was growing so much in the 20th century that there were all these famines around the world. And if your country hasn't had a famine yet, it was coming. A lot of people thought that the famines were going to wipe out a ton of the population. And India, especially, it was on the brink of a massive famine in 1961. So there's also a guy named Thomas Malthus, and he predicted this thing called a Malthusian catastrophe. And a Malthusian catastrophe is where human population is growing exponentially, but food production can only grow linearly. So most people thought that we were going to run out of food, and then there would be wars for, different types of food and water and that kind of thing. So what's really interesting is that what really saved us was this thing called the Green Revolution. And the Green Revolution encompassed a couple of different things. One really big thing was genetically modified organisms. And another thing was irrigation. Another one was synthetic pesticides. And a lot of different things led to us, as you can see in this graph here, this is the world population here, and they thought that we were going to run out of food. But due to this Green Revolution, we have actually surpassed, or food production has actually surpassed the world's population. So humans need a couple of different things, and you probably have heard this before. In the United States, the Dust Bowl was the worst famine ever. And what happened was a lot of farmers were harvesting too much, and they were planting too much, and then there was a giant drought, and most of the topsoil from the Great Plains was just whisked away on wind erosion. And wind erosion, just for a fun fact, is sometimes called aeolian erosion. So calories, if you didn't know this, most people need about 2,000 calories a day, give or take. So calories come from one of these three macronutrients. And you learned about these in biology, I would hope, or AP Bio or something like that. And there are carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. So carbohydrates are going to be things like starches, glucose, sucrose, different sugars. Lipids, which are fats, this is what we mainly store our energy as. And then we've got proteins, and proteins are going to help you to build different things like your body structures. Carbohydrates are our primary energy source, and then after your body has exhausted this, they'll start burning lipids and all those different things. So here are some staple crops. So staple crops are the foods that are produced in the largest quantities around the world. And if you look at this chart here, the very first one is sugarcane. So sugarcane is sugar, and 1.8 billion metric tons per year. So a lot of people want to say that humans are addicted to sugar, and it's actually kind of true because there's 1.8 billion metric tons of sugar being produced every year. The next one is maize, and maize is corn, rice, wheat, milk, potatoes, and then sugar beets. One interesting thing about maize is that a guy named Michael Pollan, and his name is spelled Pollan, he wrote a whole book called Omnivore's Dilemma, which is about how all of the foods that we're consuming are made of corn. We feed corn to our livestock, and then we eat the livestock, and everything we are consuming is basically just corn. So here is a world map that's showing you undernourishment. So what is undernourishment? It's where your diet does not meet the basic energy requirement, and that's going to be in calories. So you can be undernourished in one of two ways. You can be undernourished as a result of not having enough calories, or you can be undernourished in the fact that you aren't getting the micronutrients that you need. And there's a slide on that here in a second. So if you notice here, the largest portion of the world that is undernourished is actually South Asia. And a lot of people think that it's more West and Central Africa, but it's really South Asia. So South Asia is going to include India, and it looks like Nepal and other places like that. So America, lots of other places. Most places in Europe don't have many undernourished people. So humans also need these things called micronutrients, and micronutrients are going to be things like vitamins, minerals, so all the things that are on the back of your multivitamin, so things like zinc, vitamin C, vitamin A, any type of thing like that, magnesium. If you're lacking in specific micronutrients or macronutrients, you can be considered malnourished. And this picture here is a picture of a child in Africa, and he has this syndrome called kwashiorkor. And kwashiorkor is where you don't get enough protein as a child or as a baby, and it results in like fluid buildup or water retention around your abdomen, around your stomach. And it's really sad. So I'm sure you've probably seen these pictures before of your donation can help children like this, and they have this symptom or syndrome called kwashiorkor. This next picture is showing anemia, and actually a lot of Americans are anemic. And anemia is any condition that results or that causes you not to be able to deliver different things to your body in your blood. And most of the time it's lack of iron in your diet. So if you're a vegetarian and you don't eat red meat, then you could be in danger of being anemic. And you can go to the doctor, and one of the symptoms of this is that if you feel tired all the time, you don't have a lot of energy, you can probably go to your doctor and they will give you a blood test to determine how much iron you have. And usually the iron is, I think it's called ferritin. I'm not sure on that though. This last picture here is showing you this thing called goiter. And goiter is basically an enlargement of your thyroid. So your thyroid is right here, and it controls your metabolism in your body, and it requires iodine. So if you didn't know this, iodine, we get ours from iodized salt. So if you look on the back of the Morton salt or whatever salt you're buying, it'll say iodized salt, and it means that they are adding small amounts of iodine to it so that you don't get this condition known as goiter. And goiter is where your thyroid enlarges because you don't have enough iodine and you can't metabolize your food. Your thyroid is making thyroxine. It's T3 or T4, I can't remember. And most people in less developed countries are actually iodine deficient. So now that we've talked about undernourishment and things like that, we need to talk about the various types of agriculture. So where are we getting most of our food? And a lot of you did your PowerPoint presentation or your Google Slides presentation on this topic. So I've left off a couple that I don't feel are that important. These are the most important ones, I would say. And I know this is a lot of text on this slide, so I'm just going to skim across a couple of these. So subsistence is the one where you're only doing agriculture for you and your family. And this is mostly done in less developed countries. So you've got, maybe a very small family farm or something, and you're only doing it. You're not really selling a lot of the food to get by. You're doing the food just for your family. All the rest of these are new or interesting ways that you can plant crops and things like that. And the first one is called alley cropping, or it's also known as agroforestry. So you may see it as both. So what you do is you have rows of crops, and instead of having a complete separation between forest and farm, you just plant trees within your shrubs. You plant trees and shrubs within your crops. One problem with this, though, is that the trees can sometimes attract herbivores like deer, and then the deer will eat your crops and things like that. So it's also really good for wildlife. You can Google this thing called wildlife-friendly farming. Usually agroforestry will come up with that. Contour farming is going to be one where you go with the flow kind of, and you just you plant stuff on hillsides and stuff that's going with the natural flow of the ecosystem. Crop rotation is where you're going to have, let's say that you have 4 different fields, and you rotate what crop that you use each field for every year. So for example, let's say that you plant corn in one field, and the corn uses up a ton of the nitrogen out of the soil. So what you can do is you can plant the next season, you can plant something that has nitrogen fixing bacteria in it, like peas or clover or something like that, and it'll take the nitrogen that's in the air and it'll put it back into the soil. And as it puts it back into the soil, then you don't have to use synthetic fertilizers, which is actually really nice. And you probably know that if you use synthetic fertilizers, the runoff from them can actually lead to cultural eutrophication, which is bad. And then lastly here, we've got this thing called intercropping. And intercropping is usually where you've got 2 different crops that are planted in the same field. And usually how they do this is one needs a ton of nitrogen, the other doesn't need the nitrogen. So a lot of times they'll use corn and peas. And this word synergy or synergistic interaction is where, the use of one kind of makes it better for the other one. All right, so let's go down here. So all of these, the various types of agriculture here, these are ones that you would probably be doing like on a family farm or something like that. So here's some pictures to kind of give you an idea. This one here is called intercropping. So here's one crop here in the middle. Here's another crop here. This is called contour plowing. These are hills or terraces, and they're trying to decrease soil erosion and just kind of go with the flow of the land. And then this one here is called agroforestry. And agroforestry is where you have the trees and the shrubs built in with your other crops. All right, so like I was saying earlier, all of these are really ones that are done by family farms or small farmers or things like that. Nowadays, we need to produce so much food, then agriculture has become really what they call mechanized. And mechanization is where most of the jobs or the work is now done by machines. Most crops in America now are industrial agriculture, where they only grow one type of crop, and they grow it and they grow it until they exhaust the land, and then they kind of move on to the next one. So a lot of people have said, is this the death of the small American farm? Because a lot of giant farms like Purdue or it used to be Monsanto before they were bought out. A lot of people are saying that these large industrial scale farmers or farming operations are causing small farmers to go out of business. So that's why a lot of people say that you should buy local or buy from local farmers, because you're trying to support their business instead of trying to support the giant agriculture industry or the giant farms. So what's really interesting about this is that we need so much red meat, so many chickens, so much turkey and that kind of thing, that we have, instead of letting the cows roam and then sending them to slaughter, we've created these things called CAFOs, or concentrated animal feeding operations. And I've got some pictures on the next slide to show you. They're generally giant indoor-outdoor facilities where the animals are raised in really small areas, and they feed them mostly corn, and they are raising them so that they can mature rapidly, and then they'll slaughter them. It increases their efficiency. They can make more money this way. So again, this industrial agriculture is what has happened to the agriculture industry over the last, I would say, 30, 40 years. And it's just in order to meet the demand and make a profit. So we used to do all these different things, but now most of it is industrial agriculture and monoculture, where we only have one crop. So here's some pictures of these things called CAFOs, or concentrated animal feeding operations. So this is an indoor facility here, and all of these cows they stick their heads through here, and then they pour corn in here, and then the cows eat. This is a picture of a chicken operation or a poultry operation, and they just basically stick all of these chickens in this giant chicken house. This is an indoor facility, and they feed them corn through these things here, and then eventually they'll take them to slaughter. Here are some examples of some outdoor ones. Most of the time, the cows don't have a lot of area to move around, and then they feed them corn in these troughs, and the cows stick their heads through the gates or the bars, and they eat the food there. Okay, one problem, or there are a lot of problems with this. One is that the ground that they are, walking on all the time causes tons of amounts of runoff. And a lot of times the runoff is going to be containing manure. And the manure will run off into a body of water, and that's going to cause cultural eutrophication, which is bad. A lot of times too, they will take all of the manure from these places, and they will just dump it into this thing called a manure lagoon. And the manure lagoon is just like a giant, I don't want to say pond of manure, and it's pretty disgusting. All right, so if you are really interested in something like this, Food Inc. is an excellent documentary, I think. If you haven't already seen it, it basically just shows you how the industry or the agriculture industry has become so mechanized. And then lastly, we want to talk about some agricultural water usage. So like I was saying earlier, whenever we needed to produce more and more food for America, there's so much demand for it, we created synthetic pesticides. We needed to use water more efficiently and that kind of thing. So we needed to use this thing called irrigation. And irrigation is where you take water and you use it for agriculture. And there are a ton of different ways you can do this. If you didn't know this already, irrigation or using water for animals and for plants, like growing food, it's the largest share of global water use, which is insane to think about. So irrigation systems that are also compared with their efficiency. And when they say efficiency, they really mean what percentage of the water is actually making it to the roots of the plants. And one problem with this is that most of the time, if you're just spraying water onto some crops, most of it is going to be lost through evaporation. So there are a couple of different ways that you can use water, or a couple of different irrigation systems. So this one is called furrow irrigation, and I'm sure you've probably seen this before. What they do is they basically have these long channels down through here, down through the middle, and the water gets pumped from like right in here, and this is water. And it's only about 40 to 60% efficient. So they call this furrow aggregation because these things in the middle are actually called furrows. So if you're interested in something like this, I once knew a strawberry farm that did this, and they did not sell good strawberries. They were not delicious. All right, drip irrigation is this really interesting thing where you use these things called porous tubes. And these porous tubes, if you've ever used this thing called a soaker hose, what you do is you just put it, you can sometimes bury it underground, and whenever you turn on the water, it just slowly drips out through tiny little pores in the hose. It's really interesting. It's really good. It's 90 to 95% efficient. So if you're going to use one, this is probably going to be the one that you would want to use. All right, center pivot irrigation, that's going to be this giant machinery. And what you do is it's basically it's got a center pivot point, and it creates a giant circle around where it waters your crops for you. And these things that are hanging down are actually the sprayers, and the sprayers will spray onto the top, and then it'll reach into the soil. So if you've ever seen things like this, if you've ever been in a plane, this is showing you like the radius of different irrigation or center pivot systems. All right, and then lastly, we've got, I've already done drip irrigation, so let's delete that one. Lastly, the last thing I wanted to talk about is irrigation and the Ogallala Aquifer. So we've talked about the Ogallala Aquifer before, right? It's in the Midwest. It runs from about South Dakota down to some parts of Texas. It's been massively pumped, and it's been overused, and it's due to a tragedy of the commons because, if you own the land above the aquifer, you technically own the water, right? So if I see someone who's pumping out a ton of water, and I say, well, I better go get that water too before they get it, so then I pump it, and then other people pump it, and this is one of the most famously depleted aquifers in the world. Remember when we talked about there's another one underneath Mexico City. It's called the Texcoco Aquifer. All right, so that is it, and I did my goal here. I've got it between 20 and 25 minutes. I'm at about 10 right now. Let me know if you like this video. If you want the videos to be shorter, I can do shorter videos. I can do longer videos. It's really up to you. I just thought that no one wants to hear me talk for 30 minutes again. So after you get done with this, tomorrow's work is to do the review of this on the Google form, and there's some questions on there that you have to answer. Have a great day.